Good evening. We hope you and your loved ones are healthy and safe during these times. My name is Marissa McCall-Dotson, and I am the Public Policy Director at the Southern Center for Human Rights. We are an organization working for equality, dignity, and justice for people impacted by the criminal legal systems in the Deep South. SCHR fights for a world free from mass incarceration, the death penalty, the criminalization of poverty, and racial justice. We are hosting tonight's webinar, Designing Transformative Justice, to give people the opportunity to imagine a society that fully addresses the needs of its community and promotes liberation rather than oppression. We have three very knowledgeable panelists here this evening who have committed their lives to bringing us closer to the society of our dreams. These ladies will help us come to a collective understanding of what transformative justice means and what we can do to change the conversation and bring about real change. Using the successful effort to close the Atlanta City Detention Center as a case study, this webinar will discuss the importance of reimagining justice and how we can create blueprints that allow communities to thrive. Nikki Roberts is a justice-involved Black queer writer, public speaker, advocate, activist, and consultant. Her passion for storytelling, diversity, and inclusivity is the driving force behind Cage-Free Communications, a Black-centered multimedia initiative that aims to transform the narratives of justice-involved people through education, healing-centered engagements, and calls to action. Nikki is also under a book contract with Fortress Press, working on her upcoming theological memoir, Freed from Within. Xochitl Bavera is the director of Racial Justice Action Center, a vibrant multiracial organizing and training institute bringing the grassroots leadership and power of low-income communities of color to win political and social transformation in Georgia. She has over 15 years of experience in grassroots organizing, media and public policy advocacy, and training and technical assistance. She's been focused primarily on ending the criminalization in Black, Latino, and LGBTQ communities. Deanna Van Buren is the co-founder and director of Designing Justice and Designing Spaces. She is a nationally known advocate for magnifying the role of design for ending mass incarceration, and her work includes the creation of multi-use hubs for restorative justice and workforce development across the country. Now I'd like to invite our panelists to further introduce themselves and give us their definition of transformative justice. From general to more specific, Nikki, will you please share your definition of transformative justice at the macro level, followed by Xochitl with your definition of transformative justice from the policy perspective, and then Deanna will have you talk about what transformative justice means to you at the project level. Nikki?
Thank you so much for that, Marissa. Yes, by way of introduction, again, my name is Nikki Roberts, and I like to just simply say I'm a vessel. And I'm happy to be in this space and have a conversation around designing transformative justice. And I'm clear that my role in talking about transformative justice, again, as a justice-involved adult, some others use language like a returning citizen, formerly incarcerated adult. I'm open to different language to refer to that status, but from that vantage point, or from this vantage point, I can say that when I walked inside of a otherwise vacant sandwich shop in 2004 and put a toy gun on a countertop and said, "I need cash," I didn't know that I would be involved in the system for 20 years. And I must say, no one ever asked me what I needed. You know, I think that's my framework statement, and it's the truth. And I served 10 years without the possibility of parole as sanctioned, being sentenced under a mandatory minimum in the state of Georgia, and it was sentenced under as a violent offender. Armed robbery was the charge. And so going into the system, and they have a diagnostic tool called a compass, which usually gauges what a person needs who is going into confinement in the prison system. And my compass was blank. And so, literally for 10 years, for a decade, I had nothing mandated to fulfill. And so I created opportunities for change while serving my time inside of prison, which included studying and included being a part of very good programs, but nothing that got into some fundamentalistic changes that I needed. I exited prison in 2014 after serving those 10 years into the Metro Atlanta community. And I tell you, if we are to replicate any institution inside of the criminal justice system, it would be a hospital. I would say a hospital, assessing needs and having skilled workers and staff to address those needs, and providing some type of course of action and, topical treatment or surgical treatment. And I thought about that as a parallel during my reentry, now in my 5.5 years into what I've now looked at as a very intentional course of a need to be healed of unresolved pain. And for that, I'll just say in a wrap-up way with transformative justice, it was a course of action in my life, including the decade of being caged, that did nothing for me intrinsically, fundamentally, the needs that I had when I was at that sandwich counter in 2004, to the societal needs that I still had as a woman in reentry, and turning to spaces that oftentimes had well-meaning people, but people who were not trained to deal with the level of brokenness that sometimes is very apparent in the returning citizen populace. And so I have been able to have community accountability. I've been able to create community through service and serving others, and be at a table with other people who had a deep care for me and my own safety and my own wellness and my own dignity and my own need to resolve the pain I had within. And so I like to say transformative justice is a skilled and specialized handling of people, one or more parties, who need to heal. I think healing, to bring up, change is to bring up pain, is to bring up healing. And I think those are all, just intersections of our core need, and that is to recognize the humanity in one another, and to give space for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. So Jill, will you give us your definition of transformative justice, and then maybe talk about it from that policy perspective?
Yes. Hey, everybody. It's good to be on tonight. I'm Xochitl Rivera, the director of the Racial Justice Action Center, and just good to be on talking about this. I think I'll start by being like, I don't know that I have an actual full definition of transformative justice. What I always want to give honor to is just the origins of restorative justice and the evolution of that into transformative justice in terms of a set of practices that many in our nation are trying to practice and put into play and make real, and see what other kinds of justices are possible outside of the system that we currently have, like discarding the punitive, discarding the racist, discarding all of the things that we know don't work about our current criminal justice system, and working towards a really different model. So I feel like I just always want to give honor to those very specific programs that exist, and where people are working really hard to try in small and big ways to see what else is possible. And then to throw in, sort of for me, in some ways, when I hear the words transformative and I hear justice, what I think of on the policy level is, what are we doing to transform society, to transform our ideas of safety and wellness? that's to me fundamentally, we've sort of put this word criminal justice or criminal legal system on all these mechanisms that we have that purportedly are about keeping us safe and well, but do not keep us safe and well, and do a whole host of other things. And for me, on the policy level, it's been about asking us to transform that, to think from the bottom up. What would it be like if we were just given the blank slate and said, what do we need to keep our communities safe and well? And, you know, and then we could design that with dollars attached to that. And we didn't have to, you know, and then we could say, are police parts of that? Is the jail part of that? Is that what keeps me safe when I walk home at night? I think it's the elders who are on their porch, who are looking out when I walk down the street, who are willing to call someone out. I think it's the lights. I think it's the trash cans that make sure that people throw their trash in there and not in the street. There are lots of things which form actually safety and wellness that lie far outside of the ideas that we've been given around criminal justice. And so for me, the definition of transforming justice is for us to think about, what is our world? What does it look like? What do the policies look like? What do the institutions look like? And what do our communities look like when we value and prioritize safety and wellness over punishment, over control? These are the things that I think we've been really working hard for the last 8 years at the Racial Justice Action Center to try and see make a reality in the city of Atlanta.
Thanks, Xochitl. Deanna?
Those are good definitions of transformative justice. I think I agree with Nikki and Xochitl on their definitions. I mean, I'm going to show slides so you'll see, I think, what I think it looks like. But, you know, as a designer and someone who imagines physical environments, you know, we're actually starting a transformative justice campus in Detroit, right? And what does that look like? We don't even know yet. But our spaces should love and care for us. Right? Our spaces should nourish our bodies and our minds, and they do impact us. So I imagine a world where everybody is living in an environment that is nourishing to their bodies and minds, and access to nature and access to beautiful streets where we meet each other and can be together, and there's materialities and textures that we can touch and beautiful things to smell and to see. That the environments that we think the wealthy get to enjoy all the time, that we see as a luxury, actually are essential. And that in a transformative justice world, those are the environments that you are working in, that you are playing in, that you are living in, because what is happening on your inside happens on your outside. So I'll show some examples of that, because I think we often forget about the world around us physically. Should I share?
Yes, I was just getting ready to say, sorry. Feel free to go ahead and share your slides.
I'm going to share. So, y'all, I can't just talk. I'm an architect. I'm not even very, good with words like the lawyers are. I just need to show pictures. So let's look at some beautiful pictures. And what I'll do is I'll flow into the case study and have folks jump in on that, so you can kind of see what it is we're talking about. This is one of my images of a transformative justice world. But one thing often people don't think about how the built environment has fomented and anchored structural racism in this country. We believe what we build, right? So if you believe, and if you're racist and that's your kind of core belief, if you believe in punishment, et cetera, we are going to build it, and it amplifies those beliefs. And it lasts long after we're gone, right? Architecture in the built environment can last 50, 100, and in the case of pyramids, thousands of years, right? So if you've anchored your beliefs in the built environment, we are in trouble if they're not the right beliefs. And so we see this in sort of Black and brown communities that have been cut in half by freeways, killing their economic cores, splitting them in half, concentrating folks into these dense housing units that are unsafe and unhealthy with no resources, racist-driven planning policies and financial policies like redlining that made investment impossible in communities of color, and these toxic land uses that are co-located, providing people with asthma and higher rates of cancer. I mean, I can go on and on. There's so much of it. It's really painful to see. And then we see that in our criminal justice infrastructure, the way it gets physically represented, right? The hierarchy, the patriarchy, the punishment, the control, the security is built into the very bricks and mortar of the built environment. And what happens is these environments are anxiety producing, they're fear producing, they cause trauma to people. And as we see now during COVID-19, they kill people, right? And exacerbate disease. And that design of those facilities is doing that. And so we are abolitionists at Designing Justice, Designing Spaces, and we do not believe, this is a strong advocacy, that making these look better is the strategy that we need for a transformative justice world. That we actually have to come up with entirely new spaces, new building types that are required to repair the centuries of disinvestment in our communities of color. And we are looking at whole systems change and asking people to open their imaginations to actually imagine completely new different building types and spaces. And so for us, that right now, the infrastructure to end mass incarceration sort of falls into three types of projects. We look at restorative reinvestments in communities, so moving money into community-owned assets, creating an infrastructure for reentry that is supportive of those programs and places so we can have mass decarceration. And then the case study will talk about the repurposing and reimagining of criminal justice infrastructure. Is there empty jails, prisons, helping to close them down and repurpose them into other things. And so, everyone's like, oh, well, what are you making? What does it look like? What's the thing? And I was like, okay, there's the things, but the key thing is the process, right? We have to engage in a co-creative process to create these things. I can't go in a room and the story of the architect, I have this great vision. No, it's an egocentric old paradigm. The new paradigm is that internally we are designers, and we also have internal finance folks and community engagement expertise. We work with organizations like Nikki's and Sochiel's around the programming and then the policy piece, and that we all work together deeply with community to co-create and imagine how these things are coming together. And so the Center for Equity is a great example of this process and a beautiful outcome, which there are many, which we'll see. And the Atlanta City Detention Center is a forbidding and hideous building in south downtown Atlanta, 475,000 square feet of pain that we were brought on to think about what it could look like. And first, I'd like to hopefully pass this to you, Sochiel, to talk a little bit about, because we are only following in your courage and grace on this. We came in just a couple years ago, but you've been fighting this fight a long time.
I can, jump in and just say that sort of this phase of it is looking at, what I said earlier, which is having our communities really think about what it is to reimagine safety and wellness, and what it is the policies we have to undo, and what it is the things we have to build, and what it things we have to unbuild. And in some ways, I think a lot of us as abolitionists and criminal justice reformers, we've been really focused on what's wrong and what needs to go. And that's awesome, because there's a lot that's wrong and needs to go. And so we have spent many years talking about police violence, over incarceration. We've been fighting for reclassification of marijuana so that it's a non-arrestable offense, how we should break the contract that the jail held with ICE and holding immigrant detainees. We could see a lot of how the criminal legal system and our current way of policing traps our communities in poverty and in unwellness. And so we were working for many years to try to change those laws, to really look at, to shift the culture of policing, to move away from punitive responses to things that are actually what the root cause is, or is like an unmet mental health or a substance use need. And that work of ours really started to depopulate what we called starving the beast, which was depopulate the jail that we see in downtown Atlanta. And when we watched the numbers drop, So as we fought for pre-arrest diversion initiative, as we fought for the rest of the policy reforms, we saw that population drop. And as we did that, it got more and more egregious that the city spends $32.5 million to run it every year. And who is inside of our jail? Those who are accused of city ordinance violations, like spitting on the sidewalk, like jaywalking, like asking for money. And these are the kinds of things that has like created an entire institution for many decades in downtown. So we knew that this place needed to go. We knew we needed a campaign to close the jail. But it was in the collaboration that with Designing Justice, Designing Spaces, that we began to shift just from what needs to close and what needs to stop to what else could there be? And is there a potential for like redemption? Can a building and an institution and an entire department that a city has created to punish and hide the homeless, the poor, and those struggling with mental health issues and substance use disorders, can that be transformed into something that actually meets the needs of that very same community? You know, not the kind of transformation we've seen in some facilities where they just take down the barbed wire and then call what was a jail a homeless shelter, because that actually perpetuates all of the same culture, all the same right ideas about who is inside and how people should be treated. But could we truly transform either by repurposing or replacing a facility that had been used for decades, that was built in 1996 to hide people from the 1996 Olympic viewers, who the city of Atlanta didn't feel were the folks that nationally and internationally people should see as part of Atlanta? Like, can we do that here? Can we turn this building into something fundamentally different? And it's been our work with DJDS that helps us actually devise tools and engage community in a way that actually inspires vision to say, what do we need? Not just this is bad, this is wrong, this is harming us, but what else could we have, and what do our communities deserve, and what is it that we would build and ask from the ground up what it is we need.
So do you want to say anything about our process and our governance around this?
I'll just say, as community, there was a alliance of over 40 organizations locally led by Women on the Rise, an organization of formerly incarcerated women, and the Racial Justice Action Center to create a task force. And this is just one of those pieces for anybody listening out there, not from Atlanta, well, and even from Atlanta, this idea of community and government partnership, this idea of like shared power around the creation of new visions is just really important. We passed legislation and the mayor signed it in May of 2019 that put into place a task force that brought together stakeholders from all over the city. And we had a small planning team that helped to devise that larger task force where it says 52 Atlantans. It wasn't really 52, it was more like 80. There was like an ad hoc committee and then the committee of the committee, and it all got added together, and it was many, many people. Because the idea is, if you're gonna do this, if you're gonna redesign justice, then you need to bring in everybody, even those folks who, like, we may have different opinions, we may have different ideas of what it looks like. Let us talk it through. Let us come to find where the common ground is, and let us be at the table together as equals. So this was the process and the structure that had that process. The task force met multiple times over the year to gather as much input as possible, to engage as much community engagement, and then ultimately the power rests with the mayor of the city of Atlanta to make some final choices.
Thank you, Sochil. Sorry, my finger is like quick on the trigger with my slides. But I think that for us, the exciting and creative part is the development of special tools that help folks really give that input that of value. They need to understand how financing works, how space planning works, so that their ideas have some real roots to them. And so we developed the space and finance planning game where people were rolling dice and figuring out what their design would cost. And so there's like a co-learning that goes on that is very, very valuable. We want to democratize design. We want to democratize real estate development. So the process, as we think about transformative justice, right, stacking functions at every level, we need to be helping folks to understand, here's how I develop in my community. Here are the factors. This is what it looks like. So this isn't just for the Atlanta City Detention Center reimagining. This is for generally the public to understand how this actually gets done. So it's not done to them, but they are able to participate. And we code and analyze that data. We're very serious about it, so that when people's like, I wanted this, I was like, well, 192 folks wanted this, right? And so this is really what people are saying, and we can't argue, or government can't go and say, well, we're gonna do this. I'm like, well, look at the data. And we directly use that and turn that into concepts. And the most powerful concept that emerged with this, was this idea of a one-stop shop, or 9 pathways. And these are the 9 pathways. And you can see these are the spaces and the programs that needed to be in the Center for Equity. And when we talk about a Center for Equity, this is what it includes. Everything from knowledge building and educational spaces, community gathering spaces, places where people can get access to real justice, whether that be record expungement, et cetera, getting pre-arrest diversion, a retail marketplace, right? So we don't stigmatize any services. That's a mix of services all in one place. So people aren't running all over the place trying to get all their needs met. It's happening here. And so, you know, we've got to look with, especially with these kind of infrastructures, at a variety of options. So we looked at, well, let's repurpose the building. Let's tear the thing down. We have a couple tear down options, right? These are not easy facilities to change, and they carry a lot of trauma and pain, and they get flipped a lot, right? ICE comes in like, I'll take that building, I'll turn it into another form of incarceration. So we have to address this building type. And the downtown anchor is a full repurposing of the building. So you could see, you could see what it looks like today, but the vision is to pull off the exterior, so there's light and windows and outdoor open space and gardens on the upper level. All of the uses can get fit into this quite easily because it's a very large building. And it'll be surrounded by beautiful landscape gardens so that people are coming into an environment that's restorative from before they ever get to the building, right? So it's a sort of inside-outside integration. This was the room that had the cells, right? All of that has to get demolished. You can't be keeping that stuff and expecting it to actually do have the impact we want it to have. So looking at turning those spaces into community spaces, daycare uses and meeting rooms that you can rent, a lobby where we blew out the whole front of it and sunk the floor down so you just flow right in. You can get access to Wi-Fi, you can get legal support, you can go to you can get fresh food, you can just hang out, right? This is a public space for everybody. And then what happens if we tear the whole thing down, right? We can blow the whole thing, and then this is a very viable and not that often cost equivalent, right? So all of these come with a financial model. So we're providing this, but we're also like, this is what it costs to do this. And this is a campus approach, right? We have 3 new buildings that could be co-developed with other folks. With a central garden, really creating an anchor to downtown Atlanta. And then a distributed equity option, which is my personal favorite. I have a bias here because I believe that resources need to be hyper local. And so this looks at demolishing the building, creating a beautiful garden instead, a memorial garden that would have all kinds of features for performance, for growing food, that people could enjoy and people could come to. And then taking the actual programming, the interior programming, and distributing it throughout Atlanta into smaller centers for equity that people don't have to get on the train to come to or get in their car to come to, they could walk to it. And so we'll see where we go. Xochitl and I are pushing for these last 2 options, which I hope we'll get to. So that's an example of transformative justice through a process of policy, program, place, and finance, and what that looks like at the building scale.
That's great. Thank you so much, Deanna and Xochitl, for that. I think we're going to spend a few minutes doing some Q&A. I'd like to start with Nikki. I think that we've talked about this a little bit among ourselves, this concept that we need to be thinking about justice or what community health and safety looks like for some, but not all. There's this idea that like you hear people all the time say things like, we want to make change for people convicted of nonviolent crimes, or this concept of the city jail being about people who have been charged with very minor offenses. But I just want to broaden the discussion a little bit here, Nikki, if you might help us see what transformative justice looks like for every person who's now in our criminal legal system, the person who spits on the sidewalk, or the person who commits the most heinous crime and right now has a sentence that is, that they are not redeemable and they've been given a life sentence or even a death sentence. What does transformative justice say about the broader sense of what our communities might look like in a more just, dignified and equitable way?
Okay, I think transformative justice, Marissa, in that way would ask questions about brokenness. It would ask, where are you broken? How did you become broken? And, it would be, again, a very medicinal hospital model type assessment. It would say, what do you need? It would question that. What are your needs? And it would question that for both one charged with an offense and one who has accused of an offense. And I think, what we do need to do more of is deeply listen to people who have been affected by crimes or harmed. But what we do also need to look at is just the stats and also each other, that 76% of women who are convicted of a crime were first victims of one. So, and so a lot of the trauma, and I'm no expert on trauma, but I can speak from my own experiences that unresolved pain drove a lot of multiple traumas in my life, which led to, I'd say, harm and self-sabotage. My crime, I'll maintain, was a result of an emotional meltdown. And I knew that it wasn't a single issue. It wasn't just because there was economic deprivation, because there was, or because there was anxiety, or because there were other feelings that added to, the act of desperation, fiscal trauma. But I also had deeper issues that I had to, again, do very deep work. I'm not the result. The best of me is not the result of the prison system. In fact, it's in spite of it that I have been able to succeed, in putting that in loose quotes. And that simply means getting up and having sanity enough to know who I am and putting one foot in front of the other. But transformative justice doesn't look at crimes. It looks at humans. It looks at resolve. It looks at, again, healing-centered engagement. We've seen the failed results of retributive justice, right? We see what happens. And again, I knew that going into a cage, I knew that nothing good was going to happen going into that. I knew it wasn't going to be good for me, and I knew it wasn't going to be, do anything in a redemptive way for my own crime and what was considered as the impact and loss. So when we broaden the conversation of transformative justice, and when we also talk about creating pathways to collective freedom, then we have to assess each other as a human race, as human beings, and human needs. What were the human needs at that counter? But before I got to the counter, what was my identification pathway already set in place? That doesn't seem to be what we discuss in more popular circles when we talk about mass incarceration. We seem to highlight a very exploited narrative, right, of high school dropouts, of gang members, of people who have different identities that have been exploited, and we don't tell the human story. And that's where we go wrong. And mass incarceration is not a color issue. It's not a gender issue. It's not a class issue. But we make it that way because we seem to have a need to do that for some type of social distinction. But when we look at each other and see ourselves in one another, in both the guest and the stranger, in both the familiar and the alien, as they like to put in quotes, then we begin to see each other's needs. We begin to understand each other a little bit more when we understand each other from the vantage point of our needs. I think that's just a good place to start, a needs assessment. It doesn't excuse, it doesn't make or dilute justice. But this appetite for draconian laws and punishment and very harsh treatment, nothing comes out of it. It's a very sick and evil appetite that only perpetuates systems of harm. Violence begets violence, Gandhi said, and I believe that to this day, that if we don't get inside of these systems of harm with true, clear, and cohesive alternatives to harm, how are we looking? Are we really looking to heal and repair and mend and build again? It's something that is different. I heard someone say once, get the cop out of your head, and that's just it, just whatever that means in terms of looking in a very draconian way, where there's punishment without communication to really have an end product that we talk about. The prison system that we know it as today is a failed system that continues to be replicated off of failed outcomes, and does nothing for creating thriving and productive returning citizens, or citizens, if you will, backing up to our communities being taught to call 911, but our police becoming predators in these very communities when addressing violence and addressing people who have been deemed to be violent. What do we do for every person when we speak of collective freedom? And through the lens of transformative justice, is we do what each other needs. We do what we need for ourselves, and we do what each other needs for each other.
Thank you so much, Nikki. As you were, one of the things that struck me as you were speaking is the need to change culture, change the narrative. That takes a long time. This notion about how we bring people into these space to get them to think about these things in this broader, more humane way. Sochi, I wonder if you might help us see, in the context of the city of Atlanta and the work that has been done over the last decade or so to bring about the kind of change that allows us to today talk about closing the city jail, something that if you were to have said that to someone, in 2010 or 2012, or even in 2015, they would have laughed you out of any room you were in. Tell us some of the policy wins and some of the unique challenges that have existed as you have centered the leadership of impacted people and trying to change the narrative and the culture here in the city of Atlanta as it relates to our idea around transformative justice in these meaningful ways.
Definitely. I feel like you must have been in the room in 2010 when we got laughed out. That's a great way of saying it. Culture shift is huge, and I think there's multiple levels of it. And so I think Nikki was just speaking to a level. There is so much that we need to rethink about the way that we've been taught that justice is, that safety is, that wellness is. I was on an amazing call really recently with a former chief of police who has really started to do some work helping jurisdictions rethink public safety from the ground up. And, he was saying all this talk of defund the police, which, I'm a supporter of defunding the police, but he said, this can feel very punitive to police who honestly have been doing the job that the mayors and the council have been telling them to do. So this department has been created by the laws and by the executives in place. And now they're being, they're under a lot of scrutiny. And the idea really is what I said in my introduction, which is what happens if we zero out the budget and just said from the ground up, what is it that we need for safety and wellness? What is it we would build? What is anybody here on this call What is anyone in our neighborhood planning unit? What's anyone in our neighborhood association? Like, what keeps us safe? What keeps us well? And how would we invest in that? And, you know, and so you don't even have to get to the question of like, what would the police be in that? You don't have to say abolish them or not abolish. You just have to go, first, let's just talk about what keeps us safe and well. And then if the idea of police comes in there, let's engage that. For me, it's not what pops up, not first, not second, not third, not fourth. And so I think for us, to really be thinking from that kind of perspective and from that kind of like new vision, you know, and the culture shift that needs to happen is for us to actually believe that what we can do, and I've said this to city council before, is do you believe that we can create a system of safety and wellness that keeps us all safe? Or do you actually only believe that we can create a system that trades the comforts and some safety of some for the lives of others? Because that's how we police in the city of Atlanta. We say there are visitors, there are convention center folks, there are wealthy people in Buckhead. They come to town and we police to make sure they feel comfortable. And if some lives are lost in that process, we sorry, like that happens. There is sometimes police violence, there is an over-incarceration, there is an occupancy of certain neighborhoods. But because our main priority is to make sure that some people come to Atlanta and they feel comfortable. And the question is, can we create a system of public safety and wellness that actually holds all of us, that says all of our lives are meaningful, that says all of our lives matter, that says we all deserve a certain level of safety, of dignity, of protection? And I believe there are some people who are willing to stand out there with that vision and say yes. And I think there are a lot of people who've been elected into office and a lot of people who are working for the electeds in office who really can't see that, who really have been steeped in this way that we've been taught, you know? And I think that it's really important for us to just recognize the basic history of it. You know, there's a lot of education that's come out of this last round of protests that I'm so grateful for, that just link our understanding of our police to slave patrols. Like, it is not a distant memory. It is really important for us to say, how did we get this notion of armed enforcement that patrols our streets, and what were they first mandated to do? Because they were always mandated to control and exploit Black bodies and brown bodies. And the knowledge of that isn't some like ancient history. It's really understanding what created the institution and how the institution then forms itself and the paramilitary structures thereof. So I think that the culture shift that's been so significant in Atlanta has just been bringing to people the question of, what do you see for public safety and wellness? And can we divert slightly from this path that has carved out such a well-worn trope, right? It's like every TV show you watch in nighttime, every flash that we get I get my AJC announcements, and it's every, you know, it's all crime, it's all punishment, it's all this, it's an intense and deeply entrenched culture that we work with. And so we both need to like counter it with the ideas, with the values, with the vision, and with concrete policies that continue to chip away at the power of those institutions, which really embody those values and enact harm on our communities.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Deanna, you have been integral to the process of figuring out what we might do in the city of Atlanta with the current building. And I wonder if you might share with us in your role as a designer and architect, in terms of what kinds of challenges and successes exist around redesigning these kinds of spaces and being thoughtful about how these communities that we are trying to recenter around what health and wellness looks like. Can you talk to us about, you know, the unique challenges of trying to find the right type of space, the right type of light, and the right kind of vision for what we're thinking about here in the terms of your work?
You know, the technical solutions are not the hard ones. It's always the social ones and the financial ones, right? So do you have a leadership at every level that supports the project? Are they being transparent and working with the community? Because we are accountable to the community. Like, our accountability partner is in 4A, systems impacted individuals, Black and brown communities. It's who we work for. So even if we work for our mayor's office, we're fine to be the bridge, but know that that's where we're coming from, and being clear about that up front. There was a point where we were maybe going to walk off the Atlanta City Detention Center project because it got to a point where, like, we're not going to do that. That's just not what we're going to do. So being able to hold your ground is not something architects do ever. They just cave and do what they're told, which is why they're ineffective and you know, have been agents of, you know, mass incarceration and other systems because they don't question. So that can be challenging to step up into that, but knowing who you're working for and the values that you have and sticking with those. I think working at the community level can be challenging sometimes just because we're trying to help people understand something that has been kept from them for so long. Most people, I remember even sitting in a community meeting, we were working on the master plan or the whole community plan for the area, and people are shocked to hear that developers are coming in and buying up 50 buildings. Like, they just own all the things, and they're not even from here, right? So help people understand this is what's happening to your community, and it's traumatizing for them and upsetting for them, right? That the world that you're living in was intentionally made to mess with you and hurt you, right? So I just talked to Sochia, like, what do you believe? What is your belief system? Because that is where all of this begins. And another thing, just the challenge is talking to people about land rights and land reparations, that people need to own the stuff, that the city, maybe you shouldn't own this. Maybe what you should do is allow community ownership of these small centers for equity throughout the city, you know, so that people have, because when people own and have land, the things that they can do are 10 times more than they could do if they didn't. I've seen it happen, even beyond my wildest imagination. So trying to get people to understand that, to give up control, to give up land, to give up ownership, to get on the same page about the process. Right? I don't want to do it that way. And we're going to hold it tight over here. I'm like, well, then it's not going to work. And so those are a lot of discussions that we have. And then the financing structures are challenging, right? Getting people to pay for built environment and built work it's expensive. You know, the AC/DC project could be like $80–90 million to renovate that project. A jail costs $300 million sometimes, $200 to $300 million to build a building. These are big dollars we're talking about. How do you pay for this? You know, how do you create an environment that is co-owned by the community when the community doesn't even have jobs, right, or resources? So we have some big heavy lifting to do around how we build. What is the process by which we do it? How do we pay for it? All of that are challenging questions that we sit with every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Deanna. We have about 12 minutes left. So before we turn it over, feel free, if you are participating in the webinar and have questions for our panelists, feel free to put them in the queue, type your question, and I will identify some of the questions here and read them aloud. But just while we're giving some folks some time to type some questions, Sochi, I know we're all dying to hear the latest. If you might tell us where we are with this, with the jail closure and repurposing in the city of Atlanta.
Yes, I'm dying to know that as well. What I can say that's like really positive is for folks listening in from around the country is the incredible process of the task force that we put together, that DDS was part of, that community was part of, Women on the Rise. I mean, that was a true collaborative effort, came up with an incredible report that has policy recommendations, and those 4 recommendations for the transformation of facility. Those are now with the mayor. And unfortunately, right now, the democratic bodies, those collaborative places where community and government were in true collaboration, have been dissolved. They've been, and that means that there's a lot of questions, just a lack of transparency and a lack of community engagement around what's next and what's happening. So for our hopes, we believe that this process we're on track. We know that the jail is closing, that there's a lot of operational concerns that are being handled and addressed. We want to take care of the workers who have been there for decades and deserve to have a just transition into other work. And we hope that actually the city can find work for them that has them positioned in a place where they're actually providing services to the community, especially in this time of COVID. So all of that is like in motion, and I really, really desperately wish that I could give a date to the world that the jail will be finally closed, and we know that there will be demolition and replacing, or or some follow-up on the options that have been given. We don't have that yet. We are continuing to work with our council and our mayor's office to ensure we have that as community. And we look forward to being able to report a positive answer to all that soon.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm going to go to the questions here. There is a kind of broader question about reparations. I know that it was that Deanna referred to it already, but the question is about reparations and whether or not what role they play in the greater ecosystem of transformative justice. Open to any of the panelists providing some reaction to that question. Again, it's, do reparations play a part in the greater ecosystem of transformative justice?
I'm going to let Nikki or Xochitl answer that one, that complex, deep question.
I think addressing reparations as a part of the conversation with transformative justice can transform the political conditions we're currently in, and to really allow there to be more impetus and support, especially financially, in areas where of low wealth communities, particularly populated by Black and Indigenous people of color. I think it's important that there be a reparations that has a holistic approach, but again, transforming the political conditions. How do we look at our budgets? Our budgets are like our moral compass, for our areas, right? And so are we intentionally putting funding and support? And, again, the paradigm shifts aren't just to like change the way we think, it's to change the way we act as well, and to change behavior. So, we want to be clear that transformative justice and reparations isn't just an apology, and it isn't, an individual stimulus check, but it is something very intentional in the way, again, we transform our politics and the way we identify our budget and our funding, and who or what is centered at those conversations.
I can add on.
And I would just throw in.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, I was just saying, I'll make it brief. I'm like, give them the building, give them the land, just give it to people. They need to be prepared to receive it and develop it. That's fine. We're gonna help with that, but just give it. You've got to give it away for free.
I really agree with that. I mean, I just think that there are these concrete policy. I mean, as an organizer who's been engaged in campaigns throughout, you have this like bigger vision, and we know we're headed in a direction, and we have to figure out the steps along the way that actually get us there. And one of them is that we can create policies that have reparations in mind, that actually have restoration, reparation, redemption in mind. They are literally how you return the goods that have been held by the state or the city or the whatever jurisdiction through exploitation, control, punitive, frameworks and policies, and how to return those to communities, how to return that to the people. And I think that things, exactly what Deanna just said, we can return buildings to people, we can turn land to people, we can turn over control, and reallocate resources. And I think that is all a piece of really necessary reparations.
Yeah. I just want to let people know that we will be sharing, got a question about whether we're going to share the slides. We will be sharing the slides with participants. We also have gotten a question for Deanna and Xochitl to say a bit more about why you prefer option 4. That is the new build of those 4 options that you gave. Our very good friend and colleague Kung Lee has directed that you all answer the question as to why you prefer option 4.
I was told to show option 4 when that question was asked, so here you go.
Deanna.
So Jill, why do you like this one?
Here's why I like this one. I think right now, I think there's a number of factors. And I think that one thing that I have learned from the long slog, honestly, of the work of organizing in the city of Atlanta is that we gain ground and then leadership changes, right? Or something changes in the external environment, and we may lose ground in what we've all agreed on. And so one of the things that really concerns me is that that building was built to be a jail. I think it gets used to be a jail. I think it becomes easy to sell it to be someone else's jail. I think it's easy to be reconverted to a jail. So I'd like to see it demolished, because I think that we'd be better off replacing something that was built to cage humans to be something else. And then the second piece of that is that, like you said, it's hyper local. I know the city of Atlanta and our members and folks who live in different neighborhoods don't necessarily go downtown for services. And especially now with COVID, like we don't necessarily all want to be up in some place all together close, even though the one-stop shop was a beautiful idea. I think we're in the next 5 years just looking at sort of more dispersed, distributed places, and look at the neighborhoods in Atlanta are so segregated. There is such an inequity. And if we had a project that enabled us to look at safety and wellness and equity in that kind of distributed way, that's the long-term vision of Atlanta that I think I can really get behind.
And I agree with Sochil. We've worked all over the country, and I can tell you one thing that is consistent every single place we go is that people need hyper-local access to all these resources. The design of our cities, this is typical, where we locate all of the resources downtown, places people can't get to, places people don't feel comfortable going to, they're not welcome, actually, and expect them to go there and get there. And it's just unrealistic. The way that we have to start to plan is this distributed network of resources. This is absolutely true, like no question. And each of these actually would be little baby one-stop shops, right? So they still have all the things in them, but just less, and you can even tailor them and customize them for that specific area. The second thing I like about it is it allows for this land reparations piece that we're talking about. Like, why can't this be part of a community land trust of sites? Why couldn't you have sort of crowdsource funding and have folks in the community be able to invest in this project, right? This is this is a daycare and I've invested in it. So there's just a lot more opportunity with this model for us to hit all those points.
Thank you, Deanna and Sochil. Sochil, we got a practical question. We knew that we would, I think. People want to know how you, Miguel specifically, wants to know in the formation or putting together the legislation itself that passed, that encouraged this community-based design. What was the process of getting the legislation passed and written? What went into the thoughtfulness around the strategy?
That's a great question, especially because I love if anyone's thinking about things for the future. I want to say we designed our task force legislation after the legislation that we used to create a pre-arrest diversion initiative here in the city of Atlanta, which was, 4 years prior to that. It was part of Starving the Beast. It was part of changing the culture and providing alternatives to incarceration. And we built basically into a task force the idea of bringing together all of the stakeholders, even those who disagree, even those who stand at different places on the issue, and bringing them together in a place of shared power, which is the thing that's the most important, because actually our mayor and our council and our chief of police and our chief of Department of Corrections often make these decisions, and the person who's been in the jail last night, the person who's been arrested repeatedly for sex work, despite the fact that they weren't engaged in sex work, the person who's been, those folks don't often get to a table together and share decision-making power. So for us, it's drafting the legislation. It's really working with the council and our mayor's office to support such legislation, and really bringing in the stakeholders on doing one-on-ones and meeting with folks to understand concerns, because we do have to build toward consensus, but we also have to build toward consensus with vision. So we need to go into those meetings with a proposal of a different way and a better way of doing things, but then we need to engage people who've been in this from all different directions, including employees we need to engage everybody if we're actually going to see a transformative shift in the way that we do things.
Thank you so much for that. So we are right at an hour. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, hoping that we can maybe spend another 10 or 15 minutes. I wanted to just read the final two questions that we have here and maybe ask each of the panelists to share any final thoughts. We wanted to allow people to know how they might plug in, what opportunities exist to give their voice or their support for the work that's happening. So I'll read these final two questions. If you have some answers or comments in reaction, that's great. Want to give everybody, again, maybe take 1 or 2 minutes in final comments. So we have an anonymous question that says, in regard to creating supportive, just communities of the near future, what issues need greater examination and confrontation? Examples: sexism, ageism, ableism, speciesism, capitalism, etc. And then the final question by Virginia Cuneo says, what about spaces of intimacy for the people who are incarcerated and his or her partner or family? In prisons in the US, are there any specific places where someone who is incarcerated can feel free to love? I guess let's maybe go in the reverse order and start with Deanna. Will that be okay? And maybe just your final thoughts about today and what you think people might want to know, and if you have some reactions to those questions, it'd be great.
Sure. I can get back to the questions. I mean, we don't design prisons or jails, but I do know that at San Quentin, they have homes where folks who are currently incarcerated can spend the weekend with their beloved when they come. I did hear about that. And then an area of focus that we are talking about is capitalism is a big problem. It's a really big problem for a lot of a lot of what's going on. That's a deep question, and that we also think a lot, speak to ageism, but we'd like to think that we need to start to build an infrastructure for young people. What are spaces for youth look like, and ending youth incarceration, but what are the environments where they can thrive and be, and we don't really have them anymore. So that's something we think a lot about.
Sochi?
Yes, goodness, there's like so much to say, honestly. I feel like the thing about, the question around capitalism and sexism, I think here's what I'd say. I feel like as an abolitionist, and as somebody who just believes that we could live very, very differently than we do now, as someone who kind of suffers and struggles inside of this world that's been constructed, and I don't think serves any of us on this call, this structure that serves capital. I think that I am always in the process of dismantling that and visioning something else, like visioning something that believes in humanity, that encourages life, that moves us towards aliveness. And it's a hard thing for me. On the one hand, I really want to encourage anyone who's on the call and everyone who's on the call. It's like, how do we actually wage very concrete campaigns and build concrete spaces and demolish concrete spaces that move us in that direction, right? How do we take out the pillars of the current world that we live in? And how do we keep our imagination or our sanities or our hearts towards this very, very other place, because because all of our little fixes, like all of the small fixes, are not going to amount to the kind of paradigm shift that we actually need. But they're all necessary. They're all necessary. So we need to be doing all of the pieces that move toward that, while we know that, like, we're not trying to just fix this little piece over here and then the rest of it makes sense. No, this, like, this way that we live, this history that we've inherited in this country, in this moment, this doesn't make sense. And what we can see is, we can see the pillars that hold it up. And for me, the criminal justice system is a massive one of those. We knock that out, we take that out bit by bit, and we reinvest those pieces and those dollars into community, into the leaders we know that we have. And then what grows from that is the capacity to move to a really different world. That's my hope.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Nikki, if you might offer your final thoughts, and, again, those two questions were asking us to think about what other issues we might need to confront in this movement for transformative justice, and then thoughtfulness around love and intimacy for people who are incarcerated, and whether and how we think about that in the context of this work.
Yes, definitely. I would say, again, in the conversation of transformative justice, for me, doing faith-based social activism, especially in my context, I can say, and also as a directly impacted woman, that forgiveness seemed to be the key to my emotional prisons. That I, had to do some, again, intrinsic personal work to forgive myself, to forgive people who may not have been sorry for offending me, to forgive a lot of the harm I've endured, to forgive myself for causing harm, but to be real and transparent with myself. And then the more I was able to give myself that grace, the more I was able to give others grace. And the more I was able, again, to see myself in people's brokenness and even in their wholeness. Because I'm glad to have had a developmental path where I can see progress. I'm still a work in progress. But again, if we show up with the level of respect to assess each other's humanity, and to assess each other's needs, and that to equip people to handle folks who are sick or who have injured others or who are injured. I think we do need to look at the staffing of in the nonprofit industry and dealing with addressing violence. Who's making these decisions? Who's in the room? Who's asking the questions? What are the questions? Who's dreaming of the answers? We start looking at, of course, the tie of capitalism to the criminal justice system. And there's another conversation that needs to be had. Who's making the $1 trillion that this industry produces? It's a problem, it seems to be, on one hand, and not so much of a problem if I'm the one reaping the benefits of $1 trillion. And just looking at, again, our intrinsic needs, and not having to overthink that people need food. So how can we provide that? A community-based solution. Maslow provided us with a theory of needs that began with food and shelter and water. And we also know that it progresses to a sense of belonging and love and acceptance. So we have those needs, back to the needs assessment, and doing that on a human level. And I don't think it needs to be relegated to crimes, and I don't think it needs to be relegated in any other way that continues to divide us by labels. We have human needs, and the mass incarceration problem is a human problem. And we need to just address those things with a holistic approach. And I'm glad that, again, despite the failed parts of the system that I encountered, despite the fact that the system actually exacerbated many of my own issues, including mental health issues, I found a way. I found, through community, through my faith, through intentional practices, through community accountability, a critical option when we start talking about transformative justice, a way to be here today and still hold my head up and still be in the willingness to be, imagining and co-designing what transformative justice can look like, what repair and wholeness can look like, what forgiveness can look like in a societal form, and to make certain that I don't believe the mass messaging that says, once bad, always bad, once good, always good. Transformative justice is alive and well because we are, and as long as we are, we can change.
That was great. Thank you so much, Nikki, and Xochitl and Deanna. And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. We invite you to find ways to learn. We all have room to learn and to grow. It took us decades, centuries to get here, to develop the thoughts we have about the systems that we have. So we invite you to have an imagination and be creative, to join the groups and the organizations and individuals in the city and around the country who are trying to be more thoughtful about how we might repair the harm to communities that unfortunately continue in Atlanta, in Georgia, and in our country. So thank you all again for joining us today. We invite you to participate in our upcoming events and to check out our website, www.schr.org. Thank you all. Have a good evening.